Okay, we're going to begin. On behalf of the Center for Latin American Studies, I'd like to welcome everyone here this afternoon. I'm Harley Shaken, I'm the chair of the center, and we're delighted to have this nice a turnout in this beautiful weather. I'm very pleased to be introducing our speaker today, Senator Paul Wellstone, who is the senior senator from Minnesota. He is in his second term in the U.S. Senate. He is on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and on the Senate Labor and Education Committee, as well as a number of other Senate committees. He has a doctorate in political science from the University of North Carolina and taught for several decades at Carleton College in Minnesota. But all of these formal qualifications do not begin to tell us, in my view, who Paul Wellstone is or the unique contribution he has made and continues to make in American political life. I think he is someone, both as a professor and certainly as a United States Senator, who has fought very hard for interests of social justice and working families within the United States, and who has championed the cause of human rights internationally, often with great moral courage and personal courage, particularly as regards Colombia. He visited Colombia in December, and he visited one of the most conflicted areas of Colombia, where his very presence brought a statement that the human rights issues would achieve and receive international attention, and that the kinds of acts that were taking place would not be acceptable. He returned to Colombia last month for a second visit to the same area, meeting with many of the same people within Colombia. So he presents a unique voice and viewpoint of what's taking place there, but within a broader context of having been a real champion of human rights internationally. So I'm very honored and pleased to introduce Senator Paul Wellstone.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you for your warm greeting. I want to thank Professor Shaken for his introduction and Professor Mons for both of them for having me and the center. I want to right at the very beginning just tell everyone, are you all? Gosh, is there places for you to sit? I'm just so impressed that you came today, and it means a lot to me. I told Harley that I was going to make sure we had time for discussion, so I'll take about an hour and a half for a lecture, and then I'm not going to take an hour and a half. I just want to make sure you're alert here. But I will tell you that I am really moved by your presence in Minnesota. I was kidding around. We've had a really brutal winter, and today it was snowing. And that's not usually the case, by the way, in mid-April. And I'll tell you, if we had a day like this in Minnesota and someone was speaking indoors, no one would be there. No one would be there. But I'd like to thank you for taking some time out of your lives. You've got, for those of your students, I know exams are coming up, teachers, support staff, people in the community. Thank you for caring. Thank you for your commitment to justice. Thank you for your commitment to peace and justice. I hope it's not presumptuous of me to say that, but I feel like your presence indicates a strong interest, and I would just tell you that I'm inspired by your being here. I want to make one really quick introduction, which is my wife Sheila. We do a lot of work together. Her work actually is in the area of domestic violence. I wish actually it wasn't an issue. Unfortunately it is, and I think even today, though there's now more attention than there ever has been before about violence in families, about every 15 seconds a woman is battered. Quite often at home. A home's supposed to be a safe place, and indeed many children see it. You know, everybody talks about the violence in movies and the violence on television, but for these children it's the violence in their own living rooms. And it's no small issue. And Sheila really has been my teacher. She does the work, and I get to work with her, and I want to introduce my wife Sheila, who's here with me. I don't think that Harley will probably talk that much about himself, and I'm not going to go on, but I will tell you that it's a great university, and I know great students and faculty and others, but I have met very few people. I've done a lot of work with Harley Schenken, dealing with a lot of labor issues, a lot of trade questions, the whole issue of human rights and the right to organize and bargain collectively, and how that fits into this new global economy. And I know that as director, that's been part of what he's focused on in terms of the integration of our country and Latin America. But what I like the best is not so much the intellect, though that is always important, and in his case, very impressive. As us Jewish people would say, he's a minch, just a good person. I like that best of all. I don't know about you all, but that's how I judge people ultimately, and I think he's a perfect example of someone who does not separate the life he lives from the words he speaks. So I'd like to congratulate you all on a great director as well. And then finally, and I'm going to get to Colombia, I'm a little worried. I don't know, can I just mention to you one experience I had teaching here? It goes back a ways, and my worry is that you'll take it as a put down, but it's not. But it's okay just to mention a little bit about this. I came out here to teach. Well, as you noticed, I didn't wait to see whether you agreed or disagreed. I'm going to do it anyway. I couldn't tell. I'm pretty good as having been a teacher reading faces, but I couldn't tell. But I'm going to try this anyway and then get much more serious. I came out in the summer to teach in '71. I had been teaching at Carleton for 2 years, which meant I was like 26 or 27, not too old. And I was going to teach summer school, and I wanted to come out to Berkeley. We had some very close friends that were here, and I wanted to live in the community and see what I could learn. And we came out. We had 2 very, very small children then. In any case, I met 3 graduate students and who came up to me very early on, and by appearance I'd say I was fairly right on looking, like hair down to wherever, and they said, "You seem right on, and we'd like to be your teaching assistants." And I said, "Right on." And and so they decided to go with me, and one of them, I don't even know if I should use real names, who knows, could be here, but one of them, Mick, I will use the name, was been around here for quite a while as a graduate student, like 15 years or something like that. And so it wasn't a problem, and in fact I said, "Look, if you all want to give some guest lectures, please do so." And so summer school goes on. I had 2 classes, each of them was like 150 students, or maybe there was one that was a little larger. And students, they come by. I had really pretty extensive office hours at Carleton, small college. You had a lot of office hours, and students would come by and they thanked me for being approachable. But I didn't hear that much from them. And then the midterms, these graduate students graded everybody's paper. And so they all got, from Mick in particular, C's and D's. And nobody got much higher, and basically he wrote on each exam, this essay is empty and vacuous. Those were his 2 favorite words. And now the students started pouring into the office, to talk to me. And they said, "By the way, Mick has been saying that you have been perpetuating false consciousness in your class." And so I said, so I knew where to find him. He was at the student union making revolution over a cup of coffee, because that's basically was his activism. So I found him, and he was having a cup of coffee, and I said, "I don't quite understand this." And he explained to me, he said, "It's not personal, but you come out of that Minnesota reform bag, and you don't really understand radical politics." So I said, "Well, I don't know, we're going to have to figure out what to do. Do you want to give a lecture?" He said, "Yeah, I want to give a lecture." So now I'm about to finish with his story. He comes in to give his lecture. And I'm not kidding you, students in particular, he's got like about 10 books with him, with bookmarkers ready to roll. And he's going to start out with Noam Chomsky, I think, probably. I'm not putting him down. I think he does very good work. But And so he comes in, and I'm sitting in the class, and the students are there. I haven't talked to the students about this class, and here is his first sentence, everybody. He says, this is summer of '71, I'm teaching at Berkeley, trying to do my best. He looks at the class, and he says, this is 1971, intellectual criticism in the 1970s is empty and vacuous as evidenced by the lectures that have been given in this class. That's a direct quote. You notice I have not forgotten this. And I couldn't believe it. I was just like tensing up. And it's a true story. I've done a lot of community organizing along with teaching, and so I don't know who did this organizing. Maybe it was just spontaneous. I don't know. But he now is ready to roll, and if you really want to, take on a teacher, the best way to do it is lots of questions before they can ever get started. And so this hand goes up. Because, Mick has got like a pile of books. He's going to plow through a lot here, And this student raises his hand, and he says, excuse me. He said, yeah? Student says, I'm from the Midwest. He said, I'm from Wisconsin, and we don't understand words like vacuous. So could you describe what you mean? And so Mick says, well, yeah. And he starts describing vacuous, and then he's getting ready to roll again, and this young woman raises her hand, and she said, well, it's a funny thing. I'm from Indiana this summer. And I still don't understand what the word vacuous means. They never let him say another word. That was literally the end of the class. They completely destroyed him. And afterwards, this student came up to me. This is '71, not 2001. And he said, Professor Wellstone. I said, yeah. He said, I don't think there were good vibes in there. I said, no, I don't think so. Anyway, I remember that. Terrible thing for students is at the very end, Harley, actually this particular guy was pretty vindictive because I had to regrade all the finals. Actually it was really pretty amazing. I went to Barrancabermejo, which is in the central part of Colombia, a little north of Bogota, for two reasons. I wanted to learn more about Plan Colombia, which I want to talk about. I want to talk about the debate in the Congress. I want to talk about where we are now, and I want to get your advice and get your comments. And I went to Barrancabermejo first in early December because it has become, I guess you could say, the Sarajevo of Colombia. In a country that's very violent, it's a very violent city. Last year there were, I think, close to 500 people were murdered in the city. It's a city of about 300,000. It's not an insignificant city. It's a very significant oil-producing city. And this year, several hundred have already been murdered. And I thought that if I was going to go to Colombia, I ought to, rather than going on sort of an official tour, I ought to go to this city. I went there in December, and I met a number of people who, you meet some people who inspire you, but in particular, I met a priest, Francisco de Roy, who called Father Pacho, who had a great impact on me. During that first visit to Colombia in Barrancabermejo, part of the story of that visit was that there was an assassination attempt on my life. I kind of doubt it. I don't know. But the point is, as a United States Senator, I could come in, and we landed by plane, and then I got on a helicopter and traveled via helicopter to where we met outside the city. Most people that live there can't do that. So there was a bomb planted along the road. Who knows who it was aimed at, but I was fine. But the people there were not fine. And the focus then, at that time, from my point of view, was on Plan Colombia in general, but in particular human rights. And I was really interested. I have this wonderful woman who works with me named Charlotte Olden Moore. I think she's a giant in the human rights community. If you can't make all the big institutional changes that I dearly would love to see happen in our country, and for that matter in the world, at least every day, the reason that I so believe in the human rights work is you can, in a micro sense, if you know what I mean, every day you can make a difference. And Charlotte, just out of this office, she's in contact with people all over the world, and quite often we can help even if it's just individual people, getting somebody out, getting more protection, you name it. So part of that was the focus of human rights and how to defend the defenders of human rights. And in Barrancabermeja, this was a particular problem because so many of them had been terrorized, and indeed many of them had been murdered with relative impunity. So the question was, where was the police, where was the military? And the question also was, since we're providing about $2 million a day to Colombia, whether or not, whatever happened to human rights, where does this fit in to this framework of foreign policy? I went back to Barranca in March. I went back because Father Pacho Francisco de Roy, we had been emailing back and forth, and he said, you have to come. I'm not trying to be melodramatic, I'm just being honest that a lot of this is personal. I am not a Latin Americanist. There are many of you in here. I wouldn't be at all surprised if 3/4 of you, 75% of you, have a much more sophisticated knowledge of whether it's in South America or Central America than I do. I was at North Carolina up until my last year of graduate school a Latin Americanist. I was going to go write a dissertation in Chile. I was interested in Salvador Allende, who was this MD, doctor, democratic socialist. Then I think it was the FRAP coalition. He had been defeated, hadn't yet won office, for those of you who know what then happened in Chile. And I thought, this is fascinating, I'd like to go. And then I became swept up in the civil rights movement and anti-poverty work and anti-hunger work in North Carolina, and moved much more into politics of race, gender, poverty. That's really a lot of my work as a teacher, a lot of my work as a community organizer, and a lot of my work as a United States Senator. But it was very hard not to go back, because what Father Pacho was saying was, look, if you come as a senator, you can generate a lot of publicity in Colombia, and we need some space. I mean, for those people who are doing the human rights work. Here's what's happened. I can say this with some certainty, and I believe the reason I am starting out with Barrancabermeja is because I think this is the story of what could very well happen in Colombia, and I do not believe, and no conspiracy argument intended, I do not believe that in our country this story has been told yet. What has happened in Barranca, and the reason that Father Pacho asked me to come back, is because it has now moved from a question of individuals who were defenders of human rights and what can you do to protect them, to a city which is basically being taken over by the AUC, the paramilitary. That's basically what is now happening. And I think that, and I hope and pray that I'm wrong, but I think that there is a very good chance that Colombia could become a Pinochet Chile, but without a military coup. That is to say, the AUC is growing in leaps and bounds. This is no longer a paramilitary, or for that matter, the left, the FARC. By the way, the FARC and the ELN on the left, if you want to use those labels, I'm not sure the labels apply, are not Robin Hood justice organizations. They are implicated in the narco-trafficking, as is Carlos Castana's AUC. But this has now moved from the countryside into major cities, and between the AUC maybe taking over control of this city and an election which could produce a far-right president, I think the country could very well become very repressive. Now, this time around, Father Pacho said, you have to come because people are being murdered with impunity, and I think you could make a difference. The first time I went, Ambassador Ann Patterson, I can't say enough good about her, even if we don't agree on all the policy questions, went to Barranca. No one from the Congress had gone to Barrancabermeja. An ambassador hadn't gone, but she came with me. And again, she knows far more than I do. The second time, we were not going to just meet in the compound outside the city, but we were also going to meet with the bishop, who has become, if anybody's an opposition force to the AUC, it's the bishop. But, and I mentioned this to Harley, as we were flying by on the plane, Father Pacho said to me, I'll never forget it, this kind of man who, every time he speaks, he always shuts his eyes. He speaks very quietly. You can barely hear him. And everybody in the room stops and listens because it's usually 100 times more profound than anything any of the rest of us can ever come up with. It's just one of these individuals that you meet in your life. And he said to me, Paul, I want you to go into the city and I want you to meet with the Organización Feminista Popular, Popular Women's Organization, because 15% of the people that have now been murdered this past month are women. And I want you to go into this. This was, I think, in the, I want to say the east central part of Barranca, but it was no person's land. And he said, I want you to go in. And I said, well, Father, I will do that, but all of the security is telling me they don't even want us to go meet with the bishop in the city, and now you want me to go into this part of the city that where they've taken over, and everybody's saying that I can't do it. And he said, if you drive with me in my car, you will be fine. You will be safe. And I said, well, Father, you know, you're a priest. I'm a Jewish boy. And are you sure? And he said, for those of you who are Jewish and those of you who are not, it's amazing. He said, Adonai will look out for us. And I thought, I got to go with him. And I told the ambassador we were going to go, and to give her credit, because none of her security wanted to go, she said, I'm going to go too. We came to OFP, and we got there 30 minutes. This was at midday, and then I'll broaden this discussion in a moment, but I just want to describe this. Midday, and 30 minutes earlier, the AUC had come in. They had torn the shirts or blouses of women. They had trashed part of this house, and they basically, once again, had said they targeted. Now, in January, which is one of the reasons I came in March, they had actually come and had demanded the keys. I mean, they're smart. They've taken over the city. They want to run what the organization, what this women's organization does is they've got a clothes closet, they have meals, they do education work, they do human rights work. AUC demanded the keys, wanted to take over, and we're going to, and actually it was the intervention of the ambassador and our office and some other people that basically backed them off. But we went 1/2 hour after this had taken place, and what has now happened in Barranca Bermejo is that it's moved from a situation of how can you get individual people out who are going to be murdered, or how can you defend individual defenders of human rights, to the AUC basically taking over the city. They have cut the telephone wires of most of the city. They have gone in and taken cell phones from everyone. They have moved into many homes with impunity. And the police and military is hardly anywhere to be found. So basically, they're taking over the city, and indeed, they're taking over a good part of the country. Now, I told you, and in Barranca Bermejo in particular, the reason that they're focused on Barranca is because President Pastrana, to his credit, I think is still trying to work on some kind of a political settlement, in this particular case with the ELN. And if he could do it in Barranca, this would send a message to the FARC that they also have to get serious about it. And the AUC doesn't want that to happen, so they're just basically trying to take over the city so there can't be any DMZ. There can't be any sort of neutral zone. And they're doing it. At the end of the day, I met with General Carreño, and I said to him, and this is about the end of the Barranca story, I said to him, because I'd gotten a lot of information from Francisco de Roy, I said to him, I don't understand this. I mean, where are you? And he said, look, a lot of these NGOs, non-government organizations, and a lot of these other civil society organizations, they don't want us. They don't trust us. And then the discussion shifted, and I said, but here's where the base is. Here's where the AUC base is. Guys in particular that are war criminals, and I forget their names, I apologize. I said, why haven't you gotten them? Why aren't you going in? And he said, I'm going to. But nothing has happened. Nothing has happened at all. So I start out by saying to you that my fear for Colombia is that this country could go the way of a Pinochet Chile. I hope I'm wrong, without a military coup. There are other issues. I mean, here's how Plan Colombia was passed, I think. And I'm not going to be presumptuous, and I'm not going to put people down. I'm not going to bash anybody. But I think what happened, you all, if I say you guys in the Midwest, that's men and women. What happened last summer was that the way the Clinton administration cut this issue was very crass, very shrewd. And basically, here's what the vote was about. Are you, senator or congressman or congresswoman, are you or are you not willing to step up to the plate and vote to protect American children from drugs? No, but that's basically, look, I'll tell you, Plan Colombia passed the United States Senate like with about 85 votes or something like that. And it was very effective. I had an amendment that I think, and I'll get to amendments in a moment and where I hope we can go, that maybe, maybe the movie Traffic has had a big impact. It might have. A lot of people are talking about it. But I had an amendment that said, couldn't we take, of this 1.3 billion plan, couldn't we take 300 million and put it into drug treatment at home? Because don't you need to deal with the demand side? I gave the most brilliant argument and got about 13 votes. There are 100 people in the Senate. Kind of deflating, to tell you the truth. But I think that a lot of, you all, many of you are Latin Americanists. I think, actually, I'm not sure that more than 10 people in the Senate, and I, again, don't mean this in a sort of elitist put-down way, I'm not sure that many people were all that engaged in what was going on in Colombia. Actually, most people in the Senate and the House are not that involved in international affairs, and most people don't see any political payoff in being all that involved in international affairs. So I think a lot of people didn't understand all of the issues, and basically, you don't like to be on the receiving end of a TV ad which says to people in Minnesota, your senator had a chance to protect Minnesota children from narco traffickers. He voted no. I'm serious. I actually just finished writing a book about some of my experiences in the Senate. I could spend a lot of time in the Senate. It's like, remember the play Fiddler on the Roof, Tradition? Well, we don't vote electronically, and I'm glad we don't. It makes it much more interesting. So you have to come up and vote. You got to come right up to vote, and there's all these discussions that take place in the well. And I can't tell you how many times people will talk about a vote, and they will say, can you imagine what the attack ad would look like on television? Of course people focus on that, because communication technologies become the main weapon of electoral conflict today, unfortunately. California, God knows, am I wrong? Aren't these statewide racist TV races, basically? It's very unfortunate, but that's the way it is. So that's part of what happened. Now there are some questions. One of them, human rights. And let me tell you the second thing that happened, if this doesn't sound too inside the Beltway kind of analysis. On the Senate side, I think some senators were a little bit worried about putting all this money into Plan Colombia, especially since the military doesn't have all that great a track record. And so there were human rights conditions added by Senator Pat Leahy from Vermont. I don't think he did it in a cynical way. I think he was very sincere. And part of what he was saying was, unless the State Department can certify that the links between the military and the paramilitary are no longer there, they don't get our money. And by the way, I will just tell you, unfortunately, however honorable President Pastrana is, and I think he is honorable, at the brigade level throughout the country, the links are there. And you all have read about some of the massacres. And frankly, it's gotten only worse since Plan Colombia. And I think one of the reasons, here is my hard-hitting point, I think one of the reasons is that those amendments, when it got to conference committee, right, Senate, House, disagrees on particular pieces of legislation, then goes to conference committee to iron out the differences. Language was inserted which said that these human rights conditions could be waived for national security reasons. And that's exactly what the Clinton administration did in July, and that's exactly the Bush administration in January just gave it the back of their hand. So in some ways, it was the worst thing we could have done. It would have been better not to have any human rights conditions because it's so cynical, and basically the message we have communicated, if you all see what I'm saying, to the military, I don't think I do any damage to the truth when I say this, is don't worry about it. You put it in the legislation, then you set up a waiver, and you basically give it the back of the hand, you pay no attention to it, and so the message to the military is we don't have to worry about it. I am not at all sure that President Pastrana, maybe I am being too favorable, too positive. It is my nature to like people. I'm not so sure he wouldn't be better off if the United States government was a real player in pushing him on this very issue so that he could say to the hardliners in his own government, you know what? With those Black Hawk helicopters come human rights conditions, and like it or not, we're going to have to meet them, because if we don't, we're not going to get the money. But what we did communicates the exact opposite message, if you all see what I'm saying. That's one issue. Big issue to me. I told you, human rights. My father fled persecution in Russia, and though he's no longer alive, I've always promised myself if I ever got a chance to be in the Senate or ever got a chance to do anything, human rights would be top priority. I don't know about you all, but when I meet people in the world, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they defend human rights in their countries. I don't know how they stand up to these governments or stand up to paramilitary or stand up to FARC or whatever it is. I don't know how they do it. I really don't. Especially when, quite often, having the courage to speak up means not just that you might be rounded up, but usually what these governments do is they get to you through your children and your loved ones, right? Would you speak up if you thought that your loved one or your children could be rounded up and tortured and raped and murdered or imprisoned? You might not. I probably wouldn't. That's one issue. Second issue is the aerial spraying. And by the way, I am, let's see, I forget the herbicide now, there's glyphosate. I am the expert because I'm the only person in the United States Senate or House that's been sprayed. By the way, they say they do it with unerring accuracy, which makes me wonder, because if that's the case, the only thing I know is I was right there and they did a good job of spraying me. There are two sets of issues here, two sets of questions. One, certainly health and safety, and I don't know the answer. I think the anecdotal evidence is massive. I mean, there are a lot, but poor people get sick, you know, not as good at healthcare, but also it's true. There's nausea, there's rashes, people are dizzy, people are sick, and they have every reason to wonder, right? Because we've been through this before, you know, Agent Orange and whatnot, and the experts say there's no problem. It's always easy to say that when you're spraying someone else. But the second issue, which really troubles me, and I'll get to sort of amendment strategy, which means our strategy in terms of some of what I might want to talk to you all about and get your reaction to in a moment. And it will be in a moment, don't worry. I'm going to get there to the conclusion. The second thing that troubles me to no end is this was always lopsided. About 70% military, 30% alternative social development, maybe 30%, maybe it was less. But that's not what's happened on the ground. What the idea was that if campesinos wanted to enter into a social compact and they wanted to say, and it's much more effective to do this way, don't do this fumigation, don't do this aerial spraying, we will manually get rid of the coca if in fact you give us a period of time and the means to move toward growing other crops and other ways of being able to feed our families. Does that make sense to you all? Well, I'll tell you, in Putumayo, in the southern part, which is sort of the big operation, where we're training these 900-member brigades and got Black Hawk helicopters to make sure that we can do the spraying with impunity, et cetera, what people see is they see the Black Hawk helicopters, they see the aerial spraying, they don't see a dime for alternative. In fact, it's not there. I've started talking to some people in the Senate who don't agree with me on Plan Colombia. They voted for it. And I've said to them, that money is not getting out there. Those alternatives aren't getting out there. So it's sort of, in a sense, it's rather foolish because it's going to be grown somewhere. I mean, it's just going to move from one place to another. I mean, people are going to grow this if they have no other alternative but to feed their families. So the whole issue of where is the alternative, if this makes sense to you, economic development money, and what happened to this part of the plan, I think is a question that needs to be raised in a very bold way. Finally, on the demand side, I figured I either could have notes and I could give you the exact figure, or you could forgive me for being close to the figure. But the Rand Corporation did a study within the last year or two, and it pointed out that treatment on the demand side in our country, as opposed to interdiction, is something like 13 to 1 more efficient, and as opposed to aerial spraying is like 25 to 1 ratio more efficient. And when I met with Defense Minister Ramirez, it was interesting. He said to me on the first trip, he said, "You know, we are not pleased with your country because last year we exported 300 metric tons of cocaine to the United States." And the defense minister said to me, "If you don't do something about the demand side, it'll just move around. It'll move from one place to another in our country, or it'll go to Ecuador, go to Peru, go to Brazil. As long as the demand is there in the United States of America, somebody's going to grow it." The only reason I mention this and mention the movie Traffic is that, I don't know how many of you have seen it, but it's sort of, and again, it's a little deflating. I had a number of calls from journalists who were saying to me, you know, "Don't you think the mood piece in the country is changing? Don't you think people are now focused on this? Don't you think people are more focused on treatment? And don't you think people are more focused on ending the discrimination?" I've been trying to get a bill passed for several years now called Fairness in Treatment Act, which basically says that when it comes to alcoholism and substance abuse, broadly defined, drug addiction as well, rather than in these plans, healthcare plans, saying to people, 3 times a year, detox 2 days each time, 4 days of treatment for chemical addiction or drug addiction, and that's it. Treat it like any other physical illness. Treat it the same way, end the discrimination, and start providing the treatment for people. And now I hear a movie has got people interested. So I think, well, I guess so, but I thought, you know, in any case, when I was teaching, I had this idea that, you know, being in the Senate, you can make a bigger difference, I guess. But the point is, I do think we have our heads in the sand, unless we're willing to deal with the demand part as well. Well, where do we go from here? I don't know what you think. I think that we've got the Foreign Operations Bill that'll come up in July, and I think for the community in our country who wants to raise some sharp questions about Plan Colombia and what we're doing, and wants to present some alternatives, I think what we have to figure out is, well, what's the critique and what are the alternatives? I'm thinking about a couple of amendments, throw them out, then we open it up for discussion. One, which may give some guidance as to where to go. One amendment would, of course, say that whatever is added onto this Andean pact or trade agreement, that some of the money should be taken out of Plan Colombia and go into treatment here. I'd like to come back at that again because I think we ought to focus on the demand side. I think now, by the way, that amendment would get a lot more votes. It's interesting. I think it would. That's different than that fairness and treatment legislation. I'm just saying that we could do much better on some community-based programs. That would be one amendment. A second amendment or a second strategy would be to say that there should be a moratorium on the spraying until you have done the outreach, which you were supposed to do, which would give campesinos and others the choice as to whether manually they wanted to eradicate this coca production, and you gave them the opportunities to move to growing other crops. Especially since, by the way, through this spraying, we're also destroying not just illicit crops, but some legal crops as well. You just say, look, this isn't work. Do you all see what I'm saying? I'm trying to think of what's realistic, not just sort of pie in the sky. It would seem to me that is a second reasonable proposition by way of raising questions about this. A third, and this is not in order of importance, on human rights, end the waiver. Don't have the human rights conditions unless you end the waiver. Just basically say that we are serious because, look, when we read in the papers, or you see on television, or you hear on public radio, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting some of the different parts of Colombia, but you all know what I'm talking about, that the paramilitary came in and with stones they crushed the skulls of like 26 people, one of them a child as young as age 15 or whatever. And the military, if not directly involved, didn't lift a finger to stop it. You know, we have to worry about this because this is our money, at least indirectly. So it seems to me this notion of severing these ties at the brigade level between the military and paramilitary has to be a condition for assistance without a waiver, and I think that should be a direct frontal challenge. Now I'm going to keep quiet and see whether you think maybe not. You see where I'm heading on this. I think that's a terribly important question, and I think people in the country might be sympathetic to that because unfortunately there are any number of massacres we can now point to where sometimes we can literally say the military was on the cell phone with the paramilitary, there was coordination. At the very minimum, we can say sometimes they stopped human rights workers as they were trying to get there, or we can say people told them it was going to happen. That happens in Barranca, but they don't do anything. Well, if that is the case, that raises very real questions as to whether or not we want to have our money, if not directly, indirectly implicated. So I think the human rights conditions without this waiver, which is this huge loophole, is terribly important. I think that we could also target that even more and say in those parts of Colombia where you have the most active Plan Colombia taking place, where the military is involved, directly involved, and we're doing the training. In particular, we can ask for a report that looks directly at the links between the military and paramilitary. I'd like to know, a lot of this is being contracted out. I'd like to know who are these folks that U.S. money is going to, who are involved in the training. I'd like to know who they are. I'd like to know what they do. I'd like to have some public information. I'd like to shine some sunlight on that, if that makes sense. Some people argue just basically have an amendment on the Foreign Operations Bill that ends it. I don't think it'll go very far, and I don't think it'll get very many votes, and I think it's probably counterproductive. I am thinking about, in fact, I am doing it today, actually today. This is just a little thing you do, but I feel good about it because, you know, I just have this attachment to some of the people I've met in Barranca. You know how that happens, and I actually am sending a letter to General Carreno, which I'm CCing to Secretary Powell and to Ambassador Patterson and to President Pastrana, in which I'm saying we had this discussion. You told me that you were going to go in there and you were going to get these guys. You told me that you were going to, and you haven't done anything, and I'm going to have an amendment on the floor of the United States Senate that's going to use you as a specific example and say that unless you do this, given we know where they are, I'm going to list the people that there's going to be a cutoff from some assistance. That's harder for people to vote against, by the way. If I can come to the floor and marshal the evidence and say this is exactly the situation, and I can have, you know, I can have letters from testimony from Father Pacho and others, you see what I'm saying? And I can say this is exactly what's going on, and damn it, senators, I don't care whether you're Democrats or Republicans, can't we at least communicate this message? It might be an interesting way of getting at the larger question. Finally, I think, if I didn't say this earlier, and I'm sorry, I don't know kind of the practical application of this, some of you have thought it through better. I do think we need some international observers on the health effects of this sprain. I don't think we just can continue to do this and not have some, you know, international presence, medical community that's on the ground, that's taking a look at what's happening and maybe reaching some tentative conclusions as to the health and safety effects, or for that matter, what it's basically doing to the ecology of the country. So these are the questions. These are, as I say, this is going to come up probably in July in the Foreign Operations bill. I'm thinking of, this is the first time I've really done any public speaking. I'm thinking of trying to get the word out, you know, to the community in the country and seeing whether we can get a real head of steam, do a media strategy, not about me, but about this critique and some ways in which people say, look, this doesn't, yes, we should be providing help in the country. It's a very real question whether this is working, shouldn't we be doing this, and try to make the fight. I am not an expert, and sometimes on the basis of the 2 visits I've done to Colombia, you know, like you all have probably reached this conclusion in some of your travel. I tell you, given all the narco traffickers, sometimes you think that the good people are far and few between, because there's so many people implicated in this. And it's not simple. It's actually quite complicated. It's not like a government that directly hires right-wing death squads to go out and murder people. That's not what Pastrana is about, as far as I can tell. On the other hand, I've met a lot of people that are really quite courageous and quite inspiring. And I think it's important for those of us in our country to challenge this policy, and to insist that we need to make some real changes, and we need to put the pressure on this administration. Now, you know, it's interesting. I don't know, this administration actually might be interested in some of this case that I'm trying to make, because they're not real anxious to get too involved militarily anywhere, or, you know, and they might be open. I don't know. Maybe not. I always believe it's possible, don't you? Thank you. Thank you. Just open it up for discussion.
Do you want me to take the questions, or do you want to?
Yeah, it doesn't. I can take the questions.
Okay.
It's fine. I'm sorry to have taken so long. Yeah, please. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. Thank you.
I'm very interested in your presentation, because I was at an earlier presentation and nobody was even talking about from this point of view. And I really liked your suggestion, last 2 suggestions, the moratorium on spraying, because I'm an environmentalist part and human rights thing. I thought the first one sounded a little weak. But what troubles me, and I understand you're saying it's not practical, and I vote on the questions, I hear what you're saying, is that, and this will trouble me about the other forms, nobody, even the most progressive people, are ready to say that we should just not be doing intervention.
Yeah.
And I understand what you're saying is that it wouldn't be practical and it couldn't be counterproductive. But what scares me about it is that the U.S. has got to also establish the consent of people before they can get in there. Do you understand? And if nobody's able to do that,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you got to get out again. And just before, what would you think about something like a Bowling Amendment that would say to the CIA and any secret agencies, all aid has to be above board and everything has to be crystal clear, so everybody knows exactly
Yeah.
what's going on?
No, I think that we could insist on more transparency, and I like that idea. That's another way of doing it. I was trying to get at that with who are these contractors, what are they doing? See, I'm not, there weren't very many votes against it last time. I didn't vote for it, which doesn't make me closer to God or the angels. I didn't think it was a good idea. But I think that, but what we could insist on, and I'm not opposed to, I mean, it is a nightmare for the country. I mean, it is a nightmare. The thing, I mean, I would say, frankly, that the emphasis on human rights, the emphasis on alternative economic development, and frankly, as hard as it is, the emphasis on the peace process. See, I think our government could be more supportive of what Pastrana is trying to do with the ELN, for those of you who know Colombia well, down in Barrancabermejo, than we have been. I think probably those ultimately are the only alternatives. And so I would like not to sort of be taking the position no assistance. I'd like to take the position yes, but a different package. And again, I think you can only get at it, being realistic, probably we can only get at bits and pieces of it. I'm willing to, we'll go back and forth different parts of the room if that's okay. Yeah. And I'll come over your way. I'm sorry to point.
My name is Camilla West. I'm a graduate student. I was interested in hearing that you were considering passing amendments to move some of the money into other areas like treatment.
Yeah.
But I was disturbed to hear that there was no mention of taking the money out of actual military support. And so you talk a lot about funding alternatives for
Yeah.
people growing cocoa, but in the current plan, Colombia does less than 5% of the budget, as I understand it. So it seems it would be very hard to move forward at all in support of cocoa farmers in Colombia if you're not willing to advocate for any of the removal of money supporting helicopters and other.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't say it well. I think that probably what I'm trying to say is that in this next, my guess is that in this Andean package, there'll be about 800 million and probably 600 million will be for Colombia. I'm looking at some of you that might know more. I think that's what it'll be. So what I'm saying, because can't look at the money and I'm saying that what we would try to do is say much more of this goes for economic development. That gets taken out of military. In other words, there's much more of it goes to economic development. That first you don't do this, first you have a moratorium on the spraying until you do what you said you were going to do, which is give people the chance to manually, as opposed to being sprayed, change with a couple of years to make a transition, with money to make a transition, with help to make the transition. And so you put much more into the social development or economic development than the military. Whether you could just simply say there'll be no funding for any military action at all, I think it'd be hard. But we would at least take more out of the military, if you see what I'm saying. I guess maybe I've been in the Senate too long. No, seriously, I don't know. Maybe so. I'm just trying to figure out, this crowd's not an easy crowd to pass. I'm sure you try to figure out what you can get done. But maybe I should just be bolder and just be major, frontal assault and, get my, yes. How about this? I got an idea. I got a compromise. Oh, wait a minute now, before you applaud, how about this? This is getting to me. How about the verbal frontal assault, but the actual amendment, something you can pass? Okay? We can feel good about blasting them, and then we can try and get something done. No, it's a fair question, and I understand what you're saying. I think it's not a war that can be won, I'll tell you. I don't think this plan will work, and I don't think it is working. I don't think it's working in terms of there's not the economic development, that money that was supposed to be. By the way, Colombia was supposed to kick in a lot. They can't. We're not. I think there's health and safety questions, ecology, environmental questions. Some of you raised that. There's real serious human rights questions. And in the meantime, as I told you, the AUC marches on, and there's not the commitment that I think we should have to the peace process as well. So, yeah. Yeah, I think so.
How would you describe their conduct in terms of the way they're engaging in this conflict? Say they're attacking somebody, is that a different military system better?
Well, the FARC is fair question. Did you hear the question? It's too bad. He wanted to know how I got to be so tall, brilliant, and handsome, and I was just about to answer that tough question. The question was, and I have to say again, I don't want to. Boy, I do not want to get ahead of my own knowledge base. I am not the expert on FARC or ELN, but I think what I can say, and you probably already know this, what I can say to everybody here is that the FARC and the ELN have been, they're not lovely. I mean, they have, they got child soldiers. They either pay or they kidnap kids as young as age 15 that they put directly into military conflict. I think that's a basic human rights violation. They're involved in a lot of kidnapping. I think there were some 3,000 kidnappings last year. I mean, that's one of the reasons. I mean, part of what the military will say to you, just to sort of get the other argument in here, I tried to do no damage to the truth in anything I said, and I said it was not simple. Part of what the military will say to you is, for example, down there in General Carana, who is a very got a lot of political savvy, very very sophisticated and very articulate. He basically will say, yeah, I mean, Carlos Castana and the AUC are growing by leaps and bounds, and the FARC and the ELN have only themselves to blame. And part of what he'll point to is the rash of kidnappings and some of the bombings, and So I don't think there's much good to say about them. I also think the FARC has not been terribly interested in negotiation. I think the ELN is more interested. See, that's why what's happening in Bronx is so important. I think if you could, I'm probably being overly optimistic, but I think if you could have a political settlement there, and I think the AUC knows this, that's why they're taking over the city, then there's a message that you're communicating to the FARC as well. And ultimately, this has got to be one of the longest running civil wars in the history of Latin America, right? So, but the AUC, where the AUC leads the way, is in extrajudicial killings. And they do that with relative impunity. When the first time I was there, I'm on a university campus today, the first time I was there, about 2 blocks from where I was in Bogota, the university, I guess, at about 11:30 in the morning, on the campus, a young woman who was a daughter of a very well-known industrialist, who apparently is I forget his name, you may know, apparently somebody who's been quite committed to a peace process, very, very good person, was kidnapped. And you know, that's one of the things that's driving people in the country to the right. They're sick of it, right? They're sick of it. And so Castana, you know, this originally was the landowners and some of the middle class people and wealthier people, and who basically said we want protection, and they've grown in leaps and bounds. But I will also tell you the AUC is, unfortunately, I think is by far the most powerful of all these groups, and they're involved in the most of the extrajudicial killings. But I can't say much good about FARC or ELN from what I know. Yeah.
You said originally that Congress was kind of motivated to vote for this plan because they were protecting our children from drugs.
That was the argument that was made, yeah.
Was there any evidence that was put forward? I mean, you could just spray money around anywhere, you know, have some evidence that suggests this would help somehow. Has it ever helped in the past? Any suggestion that would help this time? How is it that our money is being spent on this?
Yeah. Well, fair enough. You know, I was thinking to myself that there were also, that was one argument made, and I also have to say that, without using names of individual senators, and by the way, some of the people that I think of are people I really like, and I think President Pastrana was his own best advocate. He's very personable, and he had met with some of the people that I thought I'd have support from. They had been in Colombia, and he makes a very compelling case. What do you want me to do? These narco traffickers are destroying our country. I need help. And how do you think we can do this without military assistance? Who do you think we're dealing with? So there was that issue. I want to get back to your question, but I think I might have oversimplified. Now to go to this whole question of, this is something I'm going to say which is going to come off cynical, but I think I'm more trying to wear a political science hat. I think that you are, of course, right. That is to say, where is the evidence and that this has worked or would work. I don't know that people were so worried about the evidence. I think people were afraid of being attacked in TV ads. I want to go back to that again. Unfortunately, there's not a hell of a lot, this doesn't have a hell of a lot to do with who marshals evidence. I'm serious about it. It's one of the worst things that goes on. And I'm not telling you that everybody voted for this because they had no courage. I think some people voted for this because they absolutely believed it. The other argument that was made, the other argument, I was in a debate with Paul Coverdale, who passed away. Very nice man from Georgia. And I remember at the end of the debate, his last words I had with him, he had, I think, a cerebral hemorrhage, Sheila. I remember at the very end, I said something like, you know, he's all wrong, but he's a very good person. You know, you want to do that with people that you like. But the other argument that was made that I think some people, God, I'm not going to use names, Sheila. I can think of one senator in particular who went ballistic all over the Senate floor. I've never seen anything like it in my life. The other argument was the domino theory. The domino theory, there was, that people were this, you know, this is basically as goes Colombia, so goes many other South American countries, and we can't let these narco traffickers take over. It was unbelievable. And in particular, I guess it also had to do with the FARC, in particular and ELN. So there were three arguments. But the point I want to make is, yes to your argument about the evidence, and yes to your argument about this whole feudal war, quote, war on drugs, if that's the argument you're making, which I think it is. But I'm just telling you that I believe personally, a lot of people either genuinely believe that they were protecting children from drugs, or a lot of people were worried about the attack ads. You don't like to be accused of being soft on drugs, especially soft on protecting American children from drugs. And you want to know something else? The Clinton administration was in some ways pushed into this position. I don't even know to what extent they believed it, but they were worried. It was an election year. It was the summer before the election this past fall, which went on quite a long time this past fall, as you remember. And I think they were worried about being out, whatever label I'm looking for, here on drugs. And so they did it. I think with some tragic consequences. I don't know how to do this because there's so many, I'm not, you know, it's not like, yeah. And then, am I missing any, come over here, yeah. Yes.
Would you say that American arms industry has played a role in influencing the decision in the Senate?
Gosh, that's, you know, I'm sorry I'm not getting names, and thank you for that question. The question was, what about, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to give a good answer because I don't really know. The question was, what about the arms merchants, arms industry? Where were they in all this, you know, Black Hawk helicopters and all? And the answer is, I don't really know. I don't really know. They probably were lobbying the administration on the, you know, Department of Defense, maybe State Department. Those arguments were never made up front. You've got the money, okay, but if you do not break these ties between military and paramilitary, which we know exists all too often at the brigade level, then this money's going to be withdrawn. I think that's really was the formulation. In the conference committee, I wasn't in conference committee, and I'm embarrassed. I should know, and I can easily find out. I don't know exactly whose amendment it was in the conference committee. I don't know whether the administration lobbied for this, whether it was Ben Gilman, who chaired the Foreign Relations Committee on the House side. I don't know if it was him. I'm not quite sure who did it. Republicans, I'm not trying to make this a party thing because many Democrats have supported this, but in conference committee, Republicans by definition have majority. And basically, I think they're less supportive on the human rights issues, but I don't know who took the lead. The only thing I know is that I think it was one of the most unfortunate things that happens, because I think from the way you framed the question, you would agree with me that unfortunately by having this waiver and then basically paying no attention, we have, I think, communicated the wrong message to Colombia, to the government. And I think if there's any one thing of the different issues that I raised with you all earlier, if there's any one thing I would want to focus on, it would be to get rid of the waiver language and say, give us over the next period of time, you are going to have to sever these relationships, or we're going to begin to withdraw the money. Now, on the military, your last point, I'm sorry to not use names. It's very interesting because this is, and you know it better than I do. This is there's by no means any agreement. Father Pacho, Francisco de Roy, do you know that name? Apparently, he's pretty well known, not just in Barranca. He takes the same position you take. He says, listen. He said, I know that on the left, you're going to hear from some people saying they don't want the military involved, period. But he said, the truth of the matter is here, how do you protect civic institutions? How do you have any civil order anywhere unless there is police or military that can protect people? He said, it's a question of what they do, but it's not as if we don't want them. We just need them to be protecting us. That's what you're saying. I don't know. You know, I wonder, and again, I feel funny saying this to you because it's your country, you know so much more. In Barranca, just to talk about this one city, I sometimes feel like now after the second visit, given the strength of the AUC and what they've done in the city, I sometimes wonder whether or not the military, who after all are people that live there, I'm not so sure that part of what they're thinking is the AUC is going to take over. We're not necessarily interested in, you know, getting ourselves into trouble with it. I don't know. But no, I think this is what Father Pacho, what you just said, is his position as well. Can I ask you a question? Your first name is Claudia? Claudia? One thing I would like, can I ask you to respond to one thing? Do you think when I said that I was worried, I didn't say it would happen, but I said that I hope and pray I'm wrong, but that I really fear that Colombia could go the direction of a Pinochet Chile without a military coup, but with the AUC and, what's the name of the candidate running for president now on the right? He's building up a lot of support. There was. Yeah. Do you think that I'm wrong that this could never happen, or do you think there is a real chance the country's going to go very far right?
I think there's not a chance for military. Colombia has
Yeah.
had a long tradition.
Yeah, I don't think it would be military.
Not intervention. There is a chance that I'm going to be able to win, especially if the peace process doesn't move forward, more public opinions are to the right. But I think it's important to have a legal right, legal experience.
Yeah.
I hope that they are at the presidency, but it's important that they are there and they are strong.
And the AUC.
Well, the AAC is not.
It's growing and.
Yeah, and it will continue growing as long as things get worse, but they will not take over.
The last 2 weeks, President Fox visited Colombia and President Pastrana Chavez, and he was talking about attempting to apply a model like he's attempting to do in Chiapas and with the Zapatistas and changing the Constitution and renegotiating the social contract in society. And this past week, he said about the free trade zone of the Americas that cannot work until he called for devoting $30 billion to work on poverty issues in Latin America. Do you have a liaison, or does Congress or the U.S. government, do you see value in what Fox is attempting to do, and is there support from the U.S. Senate and from the U.S. government in trying to work together?
$30 billion would come from the U.S. government?
What?
Where would the $30 billion come from?
Well, he just proposed it.
No, I'm not trying to be cynical. I could just start out. I'm going to go to sort of the end of your question. I'll just tell you that I don't, this administration is threat. They're interested in look, they're cutting. I mean, I'm trying to figure. I do not see a bold Marshall Plan for Mexico and the United States coming from this administration. They're not even going to have money for kids in education and prescription drug coverage. But President Fox, on other things that he said, I mean, I think that his focus on human rights has surprised me, and I've been heartened to see it, and I think he's real about it. And I think that people in Mexico are wildly enthusiastic about his attack on corruption, and I think he's real about that as well. On the integration, I'm here, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is in Mexico City. I don't know what Jesse Helman's doing there, but I mean, I don't mean it in a negative way. I mean, it could be a good meeting. I mean, he told me. There are some places where I get along with Helms and others not. That would surprise you, I guess. but they're meeting there today, which is significant. I think that the whole question of what exactly will be, and look again, you guys make me nervous because I can talk to you about other issues where I don't know that I'm the expert, but I've lived it, most of my life, and I know it so much better. It seems to me that the whole question of what will be the integration between Mexico and the United States, much less, for example, in Colombia, they want to have free trade. They're talking about, God, we need a trade compact. If we could do that, exports could be our salvation. This gets back to the whole debate about NAFTA. This gets back to the debate about the maquilas. This gets back to the debate about sort of on the basis of what kind of labor rights, what kind of environmental standards. And I don't know where President Fox comes down on all that. Professor Shankin said on the labor piece, he's perhaps weaker. But ultimately, I'm hopeful. I mean, I'm hopeful about what he's been saying and part of what he wants to do. I don't think I don't think our government is going to be providing a heck of a lot, frankly. by way of economic development assistance to any other country. Doesn't look that way to me. It really doesn't. They're cutting the heck out of budgets. Guys, I'm feeling so good about this here and in the back, and I thank you for your questions.
What if you could talk a little bit about, because you said that the U.S. should play a great role in the peace process, what exactly would you like to see?
Well, I'm getting tired of these questions that I can't answer. Sheila, we gotta go. I got an important call from President Bush, who, by the way, calls me Pablo. Did you know that? I said to people in Minnesota, there was a story about it. I said, anybody who calls me Pablo, I have to like, but I am in profound disagreements with him on almost every issue. I don't.
Let's call him 43. Let's call him 43.
The only thing I meant was, I can give you a very practical answer. It's not at all theoretical. I think the ambassador, Ann Patterson, is very good. I'm very pleased that the Bush administration is keeping her on. I was worried about saying anything too positive about her while they were making up their mind. I'm serious. And she is trying very hard. That's one of the reasons she went to Veronica. She's trying very hard to make it crystal clear that our government, U.S. policy, supports this effort to reach an agreement with the ELN, supports this effort to create a buffer zone or whatever. And I don't get the impression she's getting the backing. She didn't say it to me. I don't hear much else. I don't know that she's getting a heck of a lot of backing from our government. I think that should be because if you think about it, can't you just predict that some of the folks in President Bush's administration in the State Department foreign policy field, maybe some of them are in the White House staff, or maybe it's Cheney, maybe it's Rumsfeld, I don't know. They may not be all that wild about a political accord with the ELN. But so I think our government could be stronger on it. That's all I'm saying.
Backing in the sense of using some leverage in terms of military aid, or just
No, just in terms of being, more than anything, just in terms of what it is we're saying publicly, what it is we're communicating to the strong, what it is we're communicating to the people of Colombia. We can do that. Secretary of State could do that. The President could do that. Assistant Secretary of State Augusto Pinochet could do that. And I haven't heard it. And I think it should be said. Yeah. And then I'm coming. Yeah.
Thanks, yeah. Today in...
Can you hear us okay? Do I need to go back to the mic again? Okay, I will.
Today in El Tiempo, the newspaper from Bogota, there was a story about a suit that has been filed in Colombia by two lawyers who say that the constitutional rights for public health and safety are being violated by the airline delegation. And this is supposed to be decided in 2 weeks. If a case like this were won in Colombia, what do you think this administration's reaction would be? And also, would this be something that we could use in the Senate to possibly change the course?
Yeah, the question was, I could hear it was, there has been a suit filed in Colombia saying that these constitutional rights of people that are whose health is in jeopardy, or children's health is being in jeopardy, and what would this, if this was a successful lawsuit, would it have an impact on our policy? Yeah, most definitely. I think it would be, I think we get a lot of people like you in this room here and people around the country. I think there'd be more of there'd be more pressure on the Bush administration to move away from it. I don't know that they I don't think that court decision in and of itself would ipso facto put into gear the machinery to automatically end it, but I think it would help all of us who want to challenge it, and I think they'd be under pressure, more pressure than they feel right now, that's for certain, if it's successful. Someone earlier said this, and I don't remember who it was, and I didn't get back to your point. The other thing about this Plan Colombia is that whatever is there on economic development, and I used it like 30%, and somebody else said 7% or 10%, and I don't really know. But one thing I do know is that there were a number of the governors from the southern part of Putumayo, from the southern part of Colombia, that came to D.C. They did very good work. And they basically made the point, nobody asked us. This is a plan, again, imposed from top. Nobody asked any of the people that are, right now being sprayed or right now being told this or that and the other. So in that sense, as many of you know that do work in economic development, or for that matter, any of you know do public policy work, it generally doesn't work very well when you don't even bother to talk to people that are affected by it. So that is another flaw. Yeah.
My name is B.J. Shepley. I'm the California Democrats. Like the Democratic Party at large, we generally tend to applaud like the war on drugs.
Yeah.
I know sometimes we quibble over like the specifics of how it's done, but we generally applaud it. But regarding Berkeley, both the city and this campus, there is actually like a sentiment that suggests that maybe it'd be more productive to not fight the war at all, but like actually to legalize illicit drugs, and because under the rhetoric that like would curb a demand side crimes with drugs.
Right.
And that would essentially like we'd all be better off. Like we still have some drug problems, but we wouldn't like have the massive violence and drug carteling that we have right now.
Yeah.
And I know like politically it'd be suicidal to like even for anything similar to that.
Therefore, you're not going to ask me
But like
what my position is, are you?
the viability of that idea.
Did you hear this? Paul! I realize it would be political suicide if you were to say that you were to legalize drugs, but what is your position? But would you legalize drugs? Actually, it's not a hard question for me because I'm not in favor of it, doing it, and that's my honestly held view. I do think that we ought to decriminalize. I do think that I think that what we have done with mandatory minimum sentencing is crazy. I think the number of people that we have filled our prisons with who were not kingpin dealers that are in prison right now because of use makes no sense. I think we have our heads in the sand when it comes to treatment. By the way, I don't know if you got the point earlier, but this whole issue of discrimination, I mean that very seriously. Bill Moyers did a great documentary. He's my hero journalist. He continues to do these great documentaries, so now it may have been 2 or 3. He just did one on the chemical industry, which was, I haven't seen it. Did some of you all see it? I can't wait to get a copy of it. Before that, he did something with his wife on dying that was just incredibly powerful, incredibly. And before that, he did a piece on the whole issue of all of the medical evidence. I mean, we are so far behind the data, behind the medical evidence about all of the ways in which substance abuse or addiction broadly defined, the biochemical connections. So we refuse to look at it as a brain disease. We continue to look at it as a moral failing, and we are making a huge mistake. And the healthcare plans, you all are absolutely, just like in mental health. That's here I do most of my work with very conservative Republican Pete Domenici, whose daughter has struggled with mental health and who feels strongly about this. But the same issue there, where we treat these diseases as if it's completely different with co-pays. Can I just say this for 1 second? In other words, with a deductible, how much you pay up front, or what percentage you overall pay, or how many days in the hospital you cover, or how many outpatient visits. With substance abuse, addiction, mental illness, it's completely different than physical illness, and we have to end that. So I would go all that way. I don't favor it. I mean, I do think that those who've said, look, more studies, let's be honest about it. What was it? Mayor Kurt Schmoke in Baltimore was one of the people who said, look, I think we ought to be at least honest enough to go forward with some intellectually rigorous research, and I'm for that. But I just have never taken that position. I have some friends who were down in the trenches. I think Sheila Peter Hayden, African-American guy who has got a treatment program called Turning Point, who, is adamantly opposed to, in fact, legalizing, who certainly, so I don't take that position. You tell me, Harley, when we're...
Maybe if we could take 2 more, one here and maybe...
Okay, here and, yeah.
Yeah, he mentioned the domino effect as one of the arguments that was
Yeah.
out. Sort of laughing about that, but the Bush administration in its initial briefing on Colombia last month
Yeah.
said that the major departure that they were going to take from the Clinton administration, they were going to continue the Clinton administration's policy, but the major departure that they would take would be to regionalize
Yeah.
the war.
That's why
And in the budget.
That's right.
And in the budget, the largest increase in foreign aid is to a handful of, well, the Andean countries.
That's right. That's why I talked about this Andean package, right?
Yeah, military, and in fact, I think the Bush administration is now calling it, instead of Colombia, they're calling it the Andean Counter-Narcotics Initiative.
Right. Can you hear? You can't, can you? You want to stand? This is, you're used to lecturing, right? Stand up. Can you tell everybody?
The Bush administration's initial briefing on this was in March, and given by the Deputy Undersecretary for Latin America, which a guy named Brownfield, ironically enough, said that the major difference that they would take from the Clinton administration policy would be to regionalize the war in Latin America. And in the Bush budget, the biggest increase in foreign assistance, mostly military assistance, has been to the northern tier of Latin America, along with the Peru and some to Brazil. And
That's
structural
right.
aid
That's
as well
right.
as military aid. So whereas I applaud your moves and your amendments on human rights,
Yeah.
I was wondering if there could be some amendment also to slow this kind of
Yeah,
process down,
this-
because I think that this is where things are
Yeah,
headed.
all of this, remember I mentioned Andean, all of that, that's exactly the package that I expect to come as a part of this foreign ops. So all the amendments will be focused on that whole package. And the question, your question is though, as it's expanded, how do you get a handle on that as opposed to just the specific focus on Colombia, right?
Right.
The answer is yeah, I mean, we got to do it. I haven't, maybe you can help me, but
Well,
yeah.
one of the things would be to look at the resources the resources in that area, in the Andean Amazon area, which are contested now. The oil, the mines, the biological resources. And the militarization of this area is creating a tremendous, not only the spraying, but the militarization.
Yes.
Sending troops into the riverine strategies of the early Peru
Right.
stuff in 1998. Tremendous ecological
Yeah.
damage within the entire.
Well, I'm going to have a whole set of amendments that are going to try to do this. And you know what I'll do is, can I get stuff to you and can you is that all right? I'll get, again, you've got many other things to do too, but I will get everything that we work on and get them your way, and I'd like to get your reaction. For one thing, I'm going to work with a lot of all the different human rights and different organizations too around the country, because I'm determined that we're going to do better this time than we did before. Wished I could guarantee success. Yeah. Well, two more and we'll just finish.
Still on the subject of amendments, you mentioned 4 amendments in your...
Yeah, I was thinking out loud. I don't know. Yeah.
But how many amendments is it actually politically feasible for you to push? And if
Yeah.
it's a finite number, which are the ones you're going to prioritize?
Yeah, very good question. Well, I've been known to, that's sort of one of the things I have to tell you, because, you know, I love teaching and I've just been so thrilled at your turnout, and thank you for staying for such a long period of time. One of the things that I like about the Senate that I have most enjoyed is, this is interesting. Now, Trent Lott, I'm not backbiting, I wrote about this in this book I just finished because I think he's tried to make the Senate what the Senate hasn't been and should not be. And now I think it's changing back, I hope, with it being 50-50. But one of the things that's interesting about the Senate is it's an amendment body. You don't have to, it doesn't matter, you don't have to worry about whether you're on the committee, and you don't even have to worry about whether it's germane. If you want to change the conversation, I have had Pentagon bills and bills dealing with transportation, and I've had amendments on poverty. You can come to the Senate with amendments on any subject, and if you decide you want to change the subject, not only can you bring an amendment, and then another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, you don't have to agree to a time limit on any of them. How about that? So you can create a lot of havoc, and sometimes you can have success. It's interesting though, because seriously, it's what's made actually the Senate interesting, because that means that in the House, like I was a teacher for a long time, and I wasn't elected. I mean, it started out younger in politics. I had never been involved really in politics that really to any great extent. Well, I'm sorry, broadly defined, of course, but not electoral. But in the House, you really have got to work on that subcommittee, and you've got to get to the point where you chair it or you're right up there ranking, because the rules are such that you can't do much on the floor. Have you ever seen, except at night when people speak, but then nobody's there, right? And the other, but 2 minutes, whereas in the Senate, anybody can come to the floor and you send an amendment to the desk and there you go. And somebody who was very good at that when he was in much better health was Helms. Whether you agreed or disagreed with him, he was a master at it. I remember when I first came to the Senate, Helms would come out there and I'd think, oh God, what is he going to do? Because sometimes they were really difficult votes. He knew how to. So the answer is, I could have many amendments, but I think we do want to prioritize. And the answer to that question, since I don't want this to just be spitting in the wind or fun, it's not fun, it's serious, it's people's lives. And the hard thing for me to try to figure out, we kind of had this discussion earlier, is do you do an amendment when you know you're not going to do well? And you'll get some people saying you're going to set the cause back. Do you know what I'm saying? And then sometimes I think, well, yeah, but when is it going to be said? When are you going to make people step to the plate and be accountable, even if you get 2 votes? And you have to keep thinking about that a lot. So I guess for me, the answer will be, I'll work with Charlotte and I'll work with a lot of other people. Bob White has been helping a lot, who used to be ambassador to El Salvador, if you remember. And we'll come up with, I certainly think the Human Rights Amendment will be at the top. That will be at the very top. And then I think the one on the moratorium on spraying and maybe would be another. And we'll just have to think of the top 2 or 3 and the ones that we seem to get the most support around the country, where people are making the calls and sending it, you know what I'm saying? And we'll proceed that way.
What about all the specific examples, since you said that would probably pass and that would really be good for the morale of the people in Colombia on the ground, as well as pushing this forward? Is the real specific one, would you put that into?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what will pass yet. Yeah, I don't know what will pass yet, because I'm just saying to you that I have no idea yet. It's a better Senate than it was, and there's more questioning about our policy than there was before. And I'm serious about the movie traffic. There's been an awful lot of discussion, and I think people are raising some questions about that. So maybe, for example, transfer of some money to treatment programs here would do better than before, but I don't know yet. And sometimes, I'll end this way, I was the other day, without using names again, Sheila, which I can't remember which bill it was on. I actually have amendments on almost every bill, believe it or not. No, it's true, because I figure I'm there, I feel honored, you get a chance, so why not just get to the floor and do this? And I had an amendment the other day where, and again, we don't vote electronically, where one of the senators, he's going to be one of the people who's going to run for president, I won't use his name, and Democrat, and he said to me, why are you doing this amendment? This is lousy politics, because we're going to get attacked. I agree with you, but we're going to get attacked for voting this way, and it's not going to pass. And I was so angry, but you can see his point, in a way. But then probably most of you can see my point, which was to snap back at him and say, oh, and he said, I can just see the TV ads. Remember, we had that discussion earlier. And my reaction down there in the well was, I don't know whether it's going to pass until I try. How do I know before we have the vote? I mean, sometimes you do know, but sometimes you don't. And on this one got a pretty good vote. I mean, I got into the, I forget, 40s or something like that. And then my second reaction was, if you're worried about TV ads, why the hell are you here? Just vote for what you think is right. Some of you would like that, right? I mean, and which maybe was a self-righteous thing to say, but I was trying to stick it to him, you know what I mean? But there's always, I find that to be the most difficult thing. And you know what else? One more minute. You know what happens? This is why we need more of a grassroots politics in the country. I wished I could will it into existence today. Whether it be on human rights, foreign policy, a whole lot of domestic issues. I wished I could do this, and we would have all of this great citizen politics that just really would be strong, because I'm convinced on a whole bunch of issues, kids, education, healthcare, living wage jobs, you name it, the environment, people are there, but we don't have the clout that we need. But what happens quite often with me is, and how do you, I'm trying to be a teacher and I'm done in 1 minute. Here, this is the best example I can think of. And it gets to be hard. A couple of years ago, and I made the wrong decision, I believe that now, legal services, I'm so close to the legal services community. I love these people. God, they are, you know, they don't get paid that much. They're just great justice lawyers, you know? And there was an effort, this is after the Gingrich crowd took over, right? And there was an effort to eliminate legal services. But then there was a compromise. And the compromise was, we'll keep not the same level of funding, but we won't eliminate it, but you won't be able to do class action suits. You basically, everybody knows what I mean, right, by class action suits. I mean, so I said, I'm not going to accept this. I'm going to come out there with an amendment, and I'm going to hold everybody accountable, and I am going to reinstate the language that permits legal services lawyers on behalf of one person to take on the whole practice of a hospital or of a welfare board or whatever, right? Or a city government or a school board. And the legal services lawyers who were lobbyists for the legal services community, who were in DC, came to the office and said, you can't do that. Don't do that. Because if you do that, you will so alienate these people and these people that they no longer will support this deal we have, and then the whole thing will be eliminated. And you're sitting there, and the only reality you have is not this room or anyone around the country. Your only reality is these people in front of you who have been labored for many years to protect legal services, who are being very pragmatic because they're basically saying better to live to fight another day, and you don't know what to do, if you see what I'm saying. And so I said, I won't do it. And then, as it turns out, all these legal services lawyers all around the country felt betrayed because no one made the fight, and they were angry at the people inside. So sometimes these decisions are kind of hard to know. I guess I'm somewhere between, to go back to our discussion, I'm somewhere between trying to push the envelope as hard as you can and as far as you can, and be as honest as you can, no self-righteousness intended, and at the same time, try to figure out how to be as effective as you can. And we all try to figure that out, right? Thank you.